Hi everyone, this video is to show you how to get Debian up and running and also how to create your own user account. So first of all, everyone should have installed Oracle VirtualBox from virtualbox.org, and you should have used the link that I sent you to my OneDrive to access the Debian 10.3 folder. So when you grab that folder and download it, just put it somewhere on your PC hard drive. So I've just put it on my C drive. So if I go into the C drive, you can see there's the Debian folder that I took from the OneDrive. If I go into that folder, you'll see that there are a couple of executable files. We are going to be using the one with the blue icon to actually launch Debian. The one with the red icon is just a disk image. So this is the actual VirtualBox here that we need to run. So to run it, we simply click on the actual executable and it will automatically launch VirtualBox with the Debian installation. Remember, Debian is just a flavour of Linux. Linux has got lots of different distributions, they call them. And basically you pick a distribution based on what you want to use that particular server for that you're installing. So for us, we just need a lightweight distribution because we're just using it for learning. But you'll see there's lots of different distributions as mentioned in the slides. So when Debian launches, you get a login prompt. So by default, there's one user already set up, which is what you guys would probably think of as being the administrator. In Linux, it's called the super user. So they're basically the user that has access to everything. They effectively have all the power. So this is called the root user. They're the super user. So we type in root to log in, and then the password has just been set as all lowercase password. And this is in the slides, so don't worry if you don't pick it up. So when we log in, we get a command prompt. Before we go any further, I just want to explain what it is we've actually logged into. So if we go back and look at the slides that finished off at the end of week 2, this is the last slide in week 2. We showed you the Linux architecture. Now obviously right at the centre is the actual hardware itself, and it's the kernel that interfaces with that hardware, and there was a lot of information about the kernel in the slides last week. So the kernel is very low level, it interacts directly with the hardware, and it is quite technical to communicate directly with the kernel. Therefore, to help programmers and engineers in general, there is a layer on top of the kernel called the shell. And the shell basically is there to allow us to interact with the kernel but at a much higher level. So the shell has got its own interpreter that accepts commands that are a bit more like English and easier for us to understand, and it then takes our commands and converts them into the actual kernel level commands, so the low level hardware commands. So we're going to be interacting at this shell level. So what we've just logged into is the shell. Okay, so that's what the command prompt, we're now talking to the operating system through the shell interface. So the first thing to do is look at the actual prompt itself. So the prompt has got a particular format which starts off with the name of the user you're logged in as. So you'll see it starts off with root. It's then got the @ symbol. After the @ symbol is the machine name. So this machine's just been called Debian. We did that at installation. When we created this installation, we just named the machine Debian. Following the machine name, there is also the location of where you currently are in the file hierarchy. So right now, our current location is that what looks like a squiggle just before the hash. Squiggle, the official name for it is the tilde. Tilde is the shorthand version for the user's home directory. So when you create a user, you automatically get your own directory created. Remember, a directory is the same as a folder in Windows. It's the same idea, but we call them directories instead of folders in Linux. So by default, when you add a user, as we're just about to do, they get their own directory. So when you log in, you will by default be logged into your own directory. The shorthand for that is the tilde. The actual longhand, if you like, for it is that everybody gets a directory created inside /home. And we'll look at that in a wee minute. First of all, I want to add a user so that we can have a look at what that means once we have added the user. Okay, so to add a user, we use the command add user, space, and then the name we want to call the user. So at the moment, I'm going to add a user called student. Hit return and it asks for a password. So I'm just putting that in just now. And then it asks a few other questions. Now normally you should fill these in if you were on an actual live system, but I'm just going to skip over them. Until we get to this point, you need to answer yes to say the information is correct, otherwise it won't create the account. So I hit yes and it just comes back to the prompt. You'll need to get used to that. If your command that you're issuing doesn't have an output, then it will just return to the prompt. It doesn't mean that it hasn't worked. It just means that it has ran the command, there was just no output to show. Okay, so we've now created a user. So let's log out of our current session. So to log out, we type in exit, and that takes us back to the prompt. So now I'm going to log back in again, but this time as the student. So log in, student, and then my password. And you'll notice now, you'll see the prompt down the bottom has changed to be student@debian:tilde. So let's go back and look at what I was talking about in terms of the directory that's created. The best way to show you this is actually just to show you a diagram. So I have drawn a diagram on my whiteboard that I managed to get home with me before we get shut down. So apologies, it's not the best. Trying to find a place that doesn't have any glare is quite difficult. So this is effectively the file hierarchy. So remember, if you look at the slides this week, you'll see that Linux has got one single root. It is not like Microsoft. So Microsoft has got multiple different drives like C, D, you might add in a USB, E, etc. so on. Linux has one single root, that's it, and everything comes off that root. It's a hierarchical tree structure. So by default, when you install Linux, then you get a core set of directories that are already, that get installed at installation time. I've just shown a subset of these along the top, but again, if you look at the slides for this week, you'll see a more comprehensive list. So all of these directories do have a suggested purpose of what should go in them. The majority of them are empty, but there are, a bit like good programming practice, there's sort of good system administrator rules for Linux. And you'll see in one of the slides, it gives you an overview of roughly what sort of files you should place in which directory. Now, there's no hard and fast check on this, so if you don't follow the standards, nothing will break. However, that being said, it's going to make it really difficult for any other engineers working on the system. So just to give you an example, the expectation is if you have got an executable file, you will put it in the bin directory. Bin is short for binary. So if someone was coming in to troubleshoot the system, if there was a problem, they would go to this directory looking for all the executables. If you randomly decided to stick your executable in var, then it's going to take them a wee bit of time to find that. So we generally follow the set of suggested rules of where things should go. What does happen though for definite is when you create a user, there is a home directory that's already part of the default installation, and inside that home directory, for every user you create, you get a directory created with the user's name. So right now I've created 2 users. So I've got a user that I created earlier called Don Wilson, and the one that we just created just now called student. So this is what the hierarchy looks like currently for the Linux installation that I've got just now that we're just going through. Okay, so what I'm going to do just now, guys, is end this session and then move on, and the next video is going to look at the format of basic commands.